And if it's in the Bible, we're going to believe it. We're going to try our best to learn about it. We're going to try our best to see how it applies to our world today, see how it applies to, history since the days in which the Bible was written. So let's get started. What you're seeing on the screen, Invisible Things, Session 4, Recap and Expansion. I'm going to remind y'all about what the Berean experience, having a Berean spirit actually was. Whenever you've heard anybody talk about having a Berean spirit was a good thing, it's found in the book of Acts, chapter 17. And what had happened is Paul had been teaching in the city of Thessalonica and basically got a pretty rough reception. And so he left there and went to the town of Berea. And this is what Dr. Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, described about the Bereans. And this is Acts chapter 17, verse 11. Now, these Jews, talking about the ones in Berea, these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness. In other words, they wanted to hear what Paul had to say. They wanted to hear, to give him a chance, give him a platform. But after they would hear what Paul would say, that morning or that day in the synagogue, they would go home that night and they would examine the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So that's what is the Berean spirit is two-part. One, having an open mind, being receptive to something you may not have ever been exposed to. But then second of all, don't take it just because Uncle Key says it. Don't take it just because high school buddy Key says it. Search the scriptures yourself and see if it's been tainted, if it's been slanted, if anything was left out, if anything was put in the wrong, painted in the wrong light. This needs to be, how you play it out. Okay. Now, in modern times, if you remember the words of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. That basically is what it means by having a Berean spirit. And having a Berean spirit is a good thing. All right, go ahead. All right. Session 1, we were talking about the first rebellion. And we introduced you to the sons of God, B'nai Elohim. B'nai being the Hebrew word for sons, descendants of. Elohim means created by Yahweh, created by God, created by the Jehovah God, the one true God. All Elohim basically is spiritual beings. God is an Elohim. All the lesser little g gods are Elohim. Satan is an Elohim. Angels.
The souls. The spirits.
Right. Disembodied spirits are Elohim. Mm-hmm. But there's only one Jehovah God. God was the creator. God created everything. No other Elohim, no other supernatural spirit being can be like God because there's only one of him. These lesser gods basically are just supernatural beings, but they are limited in what they can do. Now, we can briefly talk about this. God is omnipotent, means all powerful. He's omnipresent, which means he can be everywhere at once. He's omniscient, which means he knows everything all at once. He knows history. He knows the present. He knows the future. Okay? None of these other supernatural beings that in the Bible, the word Elohim is used for them too, none of these other beings have all of those attributes. Just like God said, let us create man in our own image. Well, he certainly wasn't talking about making man another Yahweh. No. Only to certain extents was man given some of the attributes of Yahweh. Well, the same thing applied to all the created beings that were here before mankind. Okay? Only certainly. Satan cannot be in more than one place at a time. Satan does not know the future. He might have a good memory. He might can put on a show and act like he knows how to predict the future, but he's not doing anything but giving predictions based on what he's seen that already has happened, like people's habits or something like that. Satan is not Jehovah God's equal counterpart. He never will be. There's only one Jehovah God. Okay. Now, when we introduced you to the sons of God, one of the things we brought to your attention was the fact that these, quote, sons of God, these B'nai Elohim, they were actually in existence and they were present when God created the universe. How do we know that? Job 38, 4 through 7. Now, because we're hitting this pretty fast, we're not putting the Bible references on the screen, but if you got your notepad and you got your pen and pencil, I'm going to be telling you where these scriptures are coming from, but I'm just going to hit them as we're moving through, because remember, this is just a recap of the first 3 sessions. All right, Satan. What do we know about Satan? Number one, he was basically God's right-hand man. He, number one, was created by God. He was the quote cherub that covers. Cherubim and seraphim were the 2 highest ranking created beings in God's heaven. And Satan was one of those. But in Isaiah 14, 12 through 15, we're told that the reason Satan was thrown out of heaven, remember Jesus said, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Okay? Well, here's why. Or at least here's some of the reasons why. Biblical commentators will call them the 5 I wills. Basically, Satan said, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Basically, Satan says, hey, I'm going to replace Jehovah one day. It's basically what Satan aspired to claim. And God wasn't going to have any part of it. When I say God, I'm talking about big G God, Jehovah, Yahweh, that is anglicized into Jehovah. And that's why he got kicked out of heaven. Now, we then hit on one part of the covenant that God made with Adam, and that was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over it. That's in Genesis 1, 27 through 30. Now that phrase is going to come back. So make a note of that. Genesis 1, 27 through 30. Be fruitful and multiply and take dominion and fill the earth and take dominion over it. But then the crafty SOB, involves himself. And who I'm talking about is the serpent, Satan in the form of the serpent. The reason we know the serpent was Satan is because in the book of Ezekiel 28, in the part of Ezekiel 28 that's specifically referring to Satan, he says, you were in the Garden of Eden. You were perfect in your ways until iniquity was found in you. So pretty much universally, everybody believes and understands that the serpent that's represented in the book of Genesis, referring to the exchange with him and Eve, was Satan himself. Now, how did the temptation of Eve come about? Here's the key part. Has Elohim indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? You will not surely die. Well, the first part of that is a blatant misrepresentation. God never said, don't eat of every tree. He said, don't eat of this one particular tree. But it goes on to say, and by the way, for you note takers, Genesis 3:1-5. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That was the temptation. And for that temptation, Satan was cursed, woman was cursed, and the seed war was declared. And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you've done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life." And here's the overarching part of that curse. "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." That's Genesis 3:13-15. The seed war, whenever you hear people use shortcuts, Genesis 3:15, that's always referring to the seed war. What do we mean by the seed war? The seed of the woman is going to be who? Jesus Christ. The seed of Satan will be him and all of his followers, and as we're soon to find out, all of the offspring that they're going to try to produce on this earth to replace what God created as humans. They're going to try to replace with their own offspring. All right, here's the point I want to make about the seed war. Satan heard God. He clearly understood the declaration of war. He knew then, and he knows now, that he is in a war for his very existence. It's we humans who are the prey, the pawns, and the prize of the seed war who haven't taken this war seriously. Now, I'm going to pause right here and I'm going to ask you, this is a philosophical question. When you watch the news on TV, when you read something on the internet about our political leaders, our economic leaders, in some cases our church leaders, don't you understand how what they're saying is so wrong and so brazen and so anti-God that you wonder, how is this coming about? Well, what I'm going to tell you is Satan has always been serious about the seed. We're the ones who are not. And as we go through this study and continue on, in the following weeks, that's the point I want to drive home to you. You need to refer everything that you're seeing and hearing and that you've learned and that he has taught you and the evidence on the ground out there has taught you. Refer back to Genesis 3:15. Satan knows that he's not been, number one, he wasn't able to stop the Messiah from being born. Number two, if he had really known, the Apostle Paul says, if he had known what the results of Jesus being crucified on the cross and being killed and rising on the third day, he'd have never put him up there. Because he didn't know what the eventual outcome was going to be. Number one, he tried to keep him from being born, but then after he was born, he tried to do a whole lot of other stuff. A lot of what you read in the New Testament starts to make a whole lot of sense when you go back to Genesis 3:15 and all the history of what got us to Jesus being on the cross through the Old Testament and the Gospels, it all starts making sense when you and I and Cynara get a very real grasp and appreciation for that Genesis 3:15 seed war.
We were just talking about this earlier today, and we were thinking back now that we know what we know. We were thinking back to Cain and Abel and how that was the kind of a first strike to try to keep the Messiah from coming, because Eve had and Adam had two sons. So one of them killed the other. And then so what we've got left is one, and he's a murderer, and God curses him. So how is the Messiah going to come now? But the devil didn't win. We have another son that's born to Adam and Eve that the Messiah came through. But you can see how just from the very beginning, different kinds of attempts are made to keep the Messiah from coming.
Mm-hmm. Now here's what I'm going to say. Once you start taking Genesis 3:15 seriously, so much of what you're going to study and learn from the historicity of the Bible, it's just like it's going to jump off the pages at you. You'll understand what the motivation is, what was trying to be accomplished. And I'm not going to point them out to you, but as we go along, when y'all see one and y'all pick up on one, I want to see if y'all can let us know what you recognize as those attempts. Like Cynara said, in the early days, there was only two, Cain and Abel. Well, Satan gets in the heart of Cain. He slays Abel. Abel's gone. Cain is basically, sitting there as the poster child of what Satan, can wreak upon humanity. So that's a good example. All right. Well, that's the story of the first rebellion. That was pretty much where we tried to go in session one.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. All right. Second rebellion: multiplication of mankind, disruption and corruption by the angels who sinned, worldwide flood, restatement of the original commandment. Now,
so I guess the big question here, if you had not seen that second one, would be, why would God destroy the earth with a worldwide flood?
Well, it starts out, and again, we're hitting high spots because we're going to try to, do just a quick recap and then go into some newer stuff. But the second rebellion was when the angels left traded out the heavenly bodies that God gave to spiritual beings while they were in heaven. They traded those out and took on more earth-based bodies so that they could mate with human women down here on earth. Now, we in session 2 we talked about we explained about those bodies, how the bodies that those angels gave up, and
the
Ocatarian is the very same body that we aspire to have when we either die and go to heaven, or if we're alive and we're raptured. That's the body we're going to take up when our spirits leave the earth. It's the same one. We want the body that they gave up. They gave it up because they had rebelled against God and they had a mission. They were on a mission. What was their mission? To keep the Messiah from being born. So here's your reference for those of you that's got the pen and notepad. Genesis 6, 1-4. I'm not going to read it word for word. I'm just going to remind you of what it was. It's where the angels saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and so they took as their wives as they chose. The Nephilim, meaning the giants, Hebrew word that literally means bully or tyrant. were on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Well, this is what this corrupting influence was. If you remember, I told you that Genesis 6, 1 through 4 was basically a very small capsulation of what the Mesopotamian story, when I say Mesopotamian, I'm talking about Sumerian, I'm talking about Babylonian. There's some other cultures, and especially other cultures around the world, have the exact same story of supernatural beings leaving heaven, coming to the earth, mating with human women, and having hybrid offspring. Now, the fact of the matter is that we believe what our Bibles say. Our Bibles say that they did was wrong, mainly because the whole reason they came to earth and wanted to have all these offspring and produce and reproduce and reproduce and reproduce was to corrupt mankind. Why? Because the Messiah has to be purebred born. Cannot have any corrupt blood in him.
Well, I've always thought too, though, that that they came, you can read that, and from that I get, up until the creation of Eve, every being that had been created was male. There was no such thing as each angel. Angels didn't have little angels. They each one was a created being by God. Then he created Adam. From Adam, created Eve. Now this new creation, which is man, human man, and his wife can join together, and they can actually take part in creation and creating after themselves their own kind. And so here come the angels, the fallen angels. They want a part of that. They want to create their own kind. They want to have some part in being able to do that too for themselves and build their own race, right?
Oh, I agree with you, and I can see that Cynara is telling you the kind, soft version of the story.
But of course, it's the ultimate outcome of that, whether each one had that in his heart or not, would be the corruption of man. There would be no Messiah to come from Adam.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, and here's the thing. When you study what history says about these created beings, they were cannibals. They practiced child sacrifice. They practiced bestiality. They said they practiced all kind of sexual perversions, murders. Yeah, I mean, it was just, well, here's what God said. I'm going to read it one more time. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's the result of what these fallen angels had brought to this earth by creating these hybrid beings.
And part of our reason for knowing that is the statement that was made of Noah, that he was a man perfect in his generations.
Yeah, I mean, why would God make a reference to Noah and saying that he was perfect in his bloodline? And like I said, if you remember from that lesson, the word perfect in the Hebrew that's used to describe Noah's generations is the same word that is the standard that God required for any sacrificial lamb, any sacrificial bull, calf, pigeon, whatever. It had to be pure blood without blemish, and no crossbreeding, no hybrid blood could be in that animal. And that's the standard, and that, to me, that's why God mentioned that as far as when he was mentioned Noah. And that was to make the point that here's what these rebelling angels had done, and I found Noah. Noah is my pure-blooded person all the way from Adam that I can use to keep blood pure to get to the Messiah at the appointed time. Now, let's see.
The worldwide flood, you've already touched on that. And
Yeah.
then the restatement after the flood of the original commandment. What else did you want?
Yeah. All right, Genesis 6, 5 through 13. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Every intention of his thoughts was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh. The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, he didn't spare any being. If it had life in it, if it had blood in it whatsoever of any form, that creature had to die, except for what God put on that ark with the 8 human beings and the animals that God specifically prescribed. And look, we can have a month of lessons on the flood, the practicality of the ark, and I can tell you, Cynara and I have done enough of studying on that. That's not the purpose of this series, but I mean, we can tell you, God had it all planned out. And if you haven't been to the Ark exhibit in in northern Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati, it number one, it's a great place to visit. We've never been, but my goodness, we've watched the videos. We learn a lot from them. But the Ark was perfectly planned, and it's all completely believable. That's what I'm going to say about that. Now, the worldwide flood, God said, I will destroy them all, man and beast. Why did he have to include the beast? Because like I said, the fallen angels, they were trying to corrupt everything that God had created. And in the crossfire, they were hoping that they could catch all the bloodlines from which the Messiah could have come.
There's so many interesting archaeological studies and everything that's been done on all that. I wish one day we'll have to do something on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Ready?
Now, here's the thing. Once the flood waters receded and the land dried, and this is, hang on a second, Genesis 8, 16 through 19, Genesis 9, 1 through 5, and verse 7. I'm going to read this to you real quick, but for those you taking notes, that's where it is. Once the flood waters receded and the land dried, Yahweh told Noah, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. That's one. God told Noah 3 different times to do that one thing. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. 3 times. He told Adam once. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because the 3rd rebellion points this out. Points out how blatant the 3rd rebellion is. God told Noah in 3 different places, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. All right, 3rd rebellion. All right. We made the point on the 3rd rebellion. The 3rd rebellion is the Tower of Babel. Now, let me say Genesis Here's something I want. Let me read this straight out of the Bible for you. Oh, here, I got it. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And for those of you that want to understand that, the land of Shinar is toward the south end of what is now Iraq. It's in the area between the Tigris and Euphrates River, but it's at the southern end toward the Gulf there, where all the oil tankers and all are. That's where the plain of Shinar is. And they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Basically, here's what he said. Let's do all this so that we won't be scattered over the face of the earth. We don't want to be scattered, which is directly in opposition to what God told Noah when they came off the boat. Spread over the earth, fill the earth, be fruitful, multiply. Have children, bless your children. Have grandchildren, bless your grandchildren, and keep it going. I want you to fill the earth, because the earth, it was already created. The earth was there. You blew the Garden of Eden, but look, the earth's still there.
We're starting over.
Let's try to do something good with it.
Second chance.
Second chance. But what happened at the Tower of Babel? We don't want to be scattered. We don't want to be spread out. We want to build a city. We want to stick together. We want to huddle together. And we want to build this tower to the heavens so that we can show God we can get to him. Kind of presumptuous, isn't it?
709.
All right. I'm going to remind you of something. Extra biblical literature indicates that the Rephaim, the giants, the hybrid crossbreeds, the weird people, reappeared after the flood. We can talk about how that came about in just a minute. But here's what you need to know. Consistent with the fact that extra biblical literature talks about the Rephaim, the evil ones, let's say, kind of ramrodded this Tower of Babel thing. The Bible says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter. The Hebrew words actually used could be interpreted to give the meaning that he was a giant and ruled by brute force. In other words, he was a hunter of humans and a builder of cities. That's, if you look in chapter 10, you'll see the reference to Nimrod. Well, there's a lot of biblical commentators that basically try to say that this Nimrod was the ramrod of this rebellion. Well, what's the result of the rebellion? God confuses the language. He makes a division of the people into separate nations. Well, I'm going to bring your attention to Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9. And I'm going to read it to you so that we can bring home the point. In Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, here's what Moses says about that. You got to remember now, Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses is looking backward on the history. At this point in Deuteronomy, when he's writing this, he's actually looking back on the history of the people of Israel. And he says, when the Most High God gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders, basically territories of the peoples, according to the number of the sons of God. According to the number, the words actually used are B'nai Elohim. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. Basically, what God said was, look, I'm sick of this. I didn't kill you when you violated, the first covenant with Adam. I gave you a second chance. I saved you through the flood, gave you a second chance there. And then here you come, and this is what you do to me. Not going to happen. So basically what he does is he brings about the division of the people into separate nations. And it coincides with the number of sons of Noah. If the nations do, we showed you the chart of the nations. Well, guess what else he did? He allotted to each of the nations, except for the lineage he was going to keep, that line from Peleg, he assigned to each nation, basically a guardian little g God, a guardian angel.
We're going to circle back to that, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. And what this brought about is, I want you to write down this phrase, cosmic geography. Because if you grasp the concept of cosmic geography, so much of what you're going to see in the rest of the Old Testament, a good bit in the New Testament, especially things that Jesus is going to do and say, and where he does them and where he says them, is going to make a whole lot more sense to you. You're gonna have a background that's going to explain to you the motivation for these things, and it's going to lead you to the book of Revelation. Okay?
Let's see. Here we go.
All right. Yahweh divided mankind with the dispersion.
That's Tower of Babel, where he dispersed them.
He forcefully dispersed them. He did that by confusing the languages. They couldn't talk to each other. Only people in their particular family could understand what only people in their family said. And if you weren't in that family, you couldn't understand them. So there was no need to hang around, because that's not what they were doing. So they did disperse. Now, in case y'all don't realize this, in physical history, there is actual evidence of great migrations about this time in the Bronze Age from southern Mesopotamia, westward all the way over to Egypt, eastward all the way over into the Far East, northward into Europe, Russia, all those areas, and south into Arabia and India and those areas. Did you know that? It's there. Physical evidence of these migrations spreading out with the center point being southern Mesopotamia. That's what your Bible says, and the physical evidence matches. Now, God set up the nations, and he made allotments to each of them, land and territories. He gave the nations spiritual entities to help govern them.
They were not given the spiritual entities to worship or to serve. The spiritual entities were given to them to help them govern, but that's not exactly how that turned out.
Yeah, it didn't turn out that way, because when we learn about the divine council, you'll see that one of the most prominent Bible passages about the divine council is where God said, "You didn't do what I was needing you to do. So I'm judging you." And we'll get to that when we get there. But let's finish this page. He gave the nation spiritual entities to help govern them. The divorced nations are allowed to continue to go their own way. And as usual, because the Rephaim show back up on the earth after the flood, we'll talk about how that happened in a little bit. They start committing abominations again. They serve and worship the little g gods. In other words, the little g gods, remember, they had some of the attributes of Yahweh, not all of them. But if I could, perform some miracle, and I'm going to remind y'all about the ones in Egypt, when Aaron and Moses appeared before Pharaoh, and basically Pharaoh challenged Moses and Aaron and said, y'all are mere mortals coming here. You tell me about this God, but you didn't show me anything's going to impress me. Well, God had already prepared Aaron to throw his staff down, and God turned it into a serpent. And basically Pharaoh said, hey, you sorcerers and magicians, y'all come here. And he's basically going to make fun of Aaron and Moses. He says, y'all throw y'all staffs down. Well, guess what? All of them threw their staffs down, and guess what? Theirs turned into snakes too. Well, I don't know what planet y'all are on, but if that happened in front of me, I would say that was a supernatural thing. Where did that power come from? Obviously, it's a supernatural event. God didn't make it happen. God was not being worshipped in Egypt at the time. Where did the power to make their staffs hit the ground and turn into snakes also? The little g gods. They had some power. They had some ability to influence this or influence that, or make something.
Some of them did and taught that to these people. All of those were not necessarily little g gods, but they were definitely taught these technologies and these sorcery and necromancy, all these different things. They even talk about metallurgy and how they were taught all that as well.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. Because they could do some miracles, they basically induced their people to start worshiping them as if they were the Almighty God. They weren't, but that's how they lied to them. That's how they misled them. And it's for that they were later judged. So they serve and worship the little g gods. They worship creation as in the sun and moon and stars. There's just Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse that lumps all of those together. And God made it clear that Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrews, the descendants of Abraham were not to worship those other gods. Now,
and we see, of course, that worshiping creation, if you've been on the History Channel at all, if you've watched any of those shows where they show how everything was lined up to the moon and the equinox and the this and the that and the all those things were probably taught by those little g gods to these groups of people that they were over. Ready for the next one?
Yep.
The Raphaim.
See.
Everything that's listed on this slide is the names are basically things, just a few of the ones that are in the Bible where references are made to either giants or the Raphaim or little g gods. You may recognize Goliath, if none other, that David's killed, and the Philistines.
Right. I mean, I can give you a long list of where, when God was talking about a particular people, he always tied it to a particular God. Or if he was talking about a particular God, he in the same place would tie it to a particular people. Now, examples of that would be Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20. For those of you taking notes, Deuteronomy 29:26, Deuteronomy 32:16 and 17, First Kings 11:33, do it.
Not much time.
Okay. All right. My point simply is this. If you want to, I can give you all the notes on cosmic geography, where the Bible time after time after time after time makes that tie from little g God to a particular people, little g God to a particular nation, and vice versa. And this is what God would have the absolute conniption fit over, is because if you remember from Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, he reserved for himself. He said, look, I'm done with you. I'm not done with you permanently, because remember, with the covenant with Abraham, he specifically said, and through you, all the nations will be blessed.
That's in next week, but that's
in next week, but I wanted to remind you of that. He didn't say he was done with them. He wasn't wiping his hands of them. He was basically saying, for the time being, you deserve what you get. You deserve what you get. Be careful what you wish for, because I'm fixing to give it to you. Okay? They didn't want to stay true to the one true God, so he gave them up for a period of time to these lesser little g gods, which are basically nothing but angels. All right, or our English concept of angels.
I was wondering if anybody counted the toes and fingers on those petroglyphs.
All right, here's what we wanted, and that ends the recap of 1, 2, and 3. What we're going to do is we're going to expand on the Rephaim. You need to know, and I told y'all this, there are way more instances of Rephaim. And remember, Rephaim, basically, it's always interpreted as giants, but being a giant was not the only characteristic of the Rephaim. Some of the characteristics were double rows of teeth. Some of the characteristics were 6 fingers and 6 toes on each foot and hand. Giantism is one of them. Now, if y'all have had much exposure to modern day giants, and when I say modern day giants, I'm talking about the people, like Ying Mao, the 7, 8 foot pro basketball player, whatever. They're not big. They're not big like is what's described in the Bible. Many of them through history, like the one that was born in Pontotoc, Mississippi, he died at a pretty early age, if I'm not mistaken, because he was what's the disease?
They have a pituitary gland disorder.
That and the fact that
They call it John.
the autoimmune system, their autoimmune system is severely compromised, and
most of the time they're very weak.
yeah, they're very weak. They're constantly fighting diseases and sickness. Well, that's not what these were. Okay, now let's talk about this. Remember, God sent the flood to end all that happening. And by the way, we need to back up. What happened to the angels who actually did this? Well, they got condemned to Tartarus. And if you remember what we said about Tartarus is like super hell. Tartarus is as far below regular hell as the earth is below heaven. That's what was understood in the days of the writers of the New Testament. When Peter and Jude both covered that subject in those letters in the New Testament, they didn't shock anybody. They didn't make a great revelation. Everybody understood what they were talking about. Okay? Everybody understood that it was angels who came to earth. God mated with human women, basically corrupted humankind, all except for what God saved on the ark, and God punished them for it. Now, what about their offspring that were already born that just kept corrupting and corrupting and corrupting and repopulating and repopulating and repopulating the land? Well, that's what God sent the flood for, was to wipe them out so that he could start over with purebred humans again. That's what he had created back in Genesis chapter 1. All right. So then here's the question. After the flood, how do they reappear? Well, there's several possibilities. One, which you'll hear some people say, well, the flood wasn't a universal flood. Well, I'm sorry, but God said it was. God said he covered every mountain, even the highest mountain was covered by over 30 feet of water. Okay. He said he wiped out everything that breathed. Everything that breathed and had blood. God said he wiped them out. So I'm believing it. I'm trusting that. So that's not a possibility. What about the possibility that first of all, Noah's wife could not have been carrying the Nephilim or Rephaim gene? Does it make sense why that's not possible? Because if God had let Noah's wife on the ark with that gene, it was over anyway. Because number one, the three boys would have had the gene, and that would have ended the possibility of a pure-blooded Messiah being born. So we know it wasn't Noah. We know it wasn't Noah's wife. So then we have to assume that Noah's 3 sons were pure-blooded too. Is it possible that one of the wives of the 3 sons was carrying the gene? It's possible, but I don't believe that either. Why? Because I don't believe God would have let that happen. I don't believe God got caught by surprise. You got to remember, in one phrasing of the covenant with Noah, it was to Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. So if God knew that one of those sons' wives, one of those daughter-in-laws carried the Rephaim Nephilim gene, why would he have told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? Doesn't make sense.
This is just opinion, but we're not buying that.
Yeah.
We don't buy it.
That's just another one of those opinions, and we're not buying it. All right. Then there's a third possibility. Were there more fallen angels? Were there more angels who had rebelled when Satan rebelled, but who had not at that time committed the sin of breeding with women, human women? Now, to me...
Or was there another rebellion? There could have been another rebellion.
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
I'm saying, is there a possibility there were more rebellion angels who had rebelled but had not committed the sin that got the original 200 thrown into Tartarus? And to me, that's the most plausible explanation of how you got Rephaim beings on the earth after the flood.
But we know that there were, because it says it back in Genesis, they were there after the flood. It says that.
Yes.
So we know that there was.
Well, and this was in the last lesson, last session, but we only touched on it. What I wanted to do was give you all the incidences where the Bible clearly makes the point that Rephaim, Nephilim, Anakim were on the earth, and God's people had to deal with them. Okay? And so how they got here, most people put forth 3 possible explanations. I discount 2 of them pretty much out of hand. The third one, to me, is the most plausible of how it could have happened. And that is, there were more angels who had rebelled along with Satan, but who had not committed the sin yet.
We can't say we know that.
No, I'm not saying that I have any evidence for that.
We just know they were there.
We just know that they were there post-flood, and to me, that's the most plausible possibility of how they got on the earth.
I agree.
Okay. Now, here your biblical references for those of you taking notes. The very first one and the most important is when the Israelites had come out of Egypt, and Moses had sent out 12 spies to go and just basically spend the next 40 days going through the land of Canaan and come back and give a report, because that's our land. God promised it to Abraham. This is where we got to head. This is what's going to be our possession one day. Well, here's how that's described. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. That's Anak, Anak. The Anakim, if you'll see on our note. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out. Now you got to remember, there were 12 sent out. 10 came back saying, we can't do this. We'll never be able to take this land. Well, Caleb and Joshua were the ones saying, "Oh, yes, we can. This is our promised land. We believe God." But they were outvoted. Let me finish what the passage says. "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants." Guess what? There were cannibals in the land. There were people there who practiced cannibalism. "And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants." The Hebrew word used right there is Nephilim. "The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." Now, for you note takers, it's Numbers 13, 28 through 33. Numbers 13, 28 through 33.
We are 1 hour in, so kind of.
Okay. All right. You made me lose my train of thought.
I'm sorry, but it's an hour already and you're just now getting, so I'm gonna have to hit the points pretty quick.
Oh, basically they were saying, as grasshoppers look to us, that's what we look like to them. That's the difference in what the human beings were, some of them anyway, that they had seen as they spied out the land. That's how they described it. Now, folks, I don't know about you, but that's pretty doggone big. That's definitely worth noting. All right, that's the first one. This is the Deuteronomy 2:11. "They were also regarded as giants like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim." Oh, I meant to go back. Did y'all know that the Anakim, the sons of Anak, the descendant, when it says sons of Anak, that doesn't mean the first generation. That means the descendants of Anak. Did you know that there are Egyptian records that call them by name and describe them the exact same way? Contemporary literature in Egypt, contemporary to our Bible, noted the Anakim, and noted that they were giants in stature. And I can get you that reference if you want it. That was Deuteronomy 2:11. And here's another one. "And when you come near the people of Ammon, do not harass them or meddle with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession." That was also regarded as a land of giants. And this time the word Rephaim is used. Giants formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites call them Zemzumin, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and dwelt in their place. That's Deuteronomy 2:19 through 21. And the Zamzummim are the ones who could make the buzzing sound. That was something they were noted for. They were also had giants, but they were also noted as being able to make some sort of buzzing sound that was unique to just them. All right. Now, next one. This is Deuteronomy 3:11 through 13. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Again, here the word for giants is Rephaim. And I want y'all to remember Og, king of Bashan, because I'm fixing to do something before we finish this evening. Make a point to you. Because it's going to be very important when we study the New Testament, especially certain things that Jesus did and where he did them. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Rabbah of the people of Ammon? Basically, they made a museum piece out of it. 9 cubits is its length and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit. And this land, which we possessed at that time from Aroer, which is by the river Arnon, and half the mountains of Gilead and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and the Gadites. The rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to half the tribe of Manasseh. All right. That bed, when he said it was 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in width, that bed of this king, and he was a known giant, was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. That was how big his bed was. So you can just imagine, though the Bible didn't do anything but describe Og as the last of the giants in the north, he was of such stature that he was characterized that way. But how big do you have to be to need a bed 13 feet long and 6 feet wide? All right, that was Deuteronomy 3:11 through 13. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit above and his roots beneath. Also, it was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. Now, and this is book of Amos 2:9 through 10. And Amos is recounting the history of Israel. He lumps them all together and calls them Amorites. But what does he make note of? The fact they were giants. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sokah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites the other, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. That's 9.75, 9 3/4 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. That's 128 pounds of armor. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. That's 1 Samuel. This is just a small part of the story of David's slaying Goliath. And that's found in 1 Samuel 17:1 through 7. Goliath was a giant. 9 feet and 3/4, 9 feet, 9 inches tall is basically what it means. All right. Then after Goliath was killed, David continued battling giants from the Philistine area. There was war again between the Philistines and Israel, and David went down together with the servants. One of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels and who was armed with a new sword, thought he could kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. After this, there was war again with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai and the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants, and there was war again with the Philistines at Gob, struck down Goliath the Gittite. This was just another giant named Goliath. And there was war again with Gath. There was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he was also descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of David's servants. This is 2 Samuel 21, 15 through 21. And one final one, Benai was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. Remember, bestiality was also something that was practiced by the Nephilim and Rephaim. And the Bible specifically calls these 2 warriors lion-like heroes of Moab. And he also killed an Egyptian, a man of great height, 7.5 feet tall. In the Egyptian's hand, there was a spear like a weaver's beam. That is in 1 Chronicles 11, 20 through 24. So the fact that Rephaim and Nephilim were physically here on the earth after the flood is not in question. It's in the Bible. Okay? And we explained how we got there. Let's cover some more contemporary facts. Just like, when we covered the flood, remember I gave y'all a lot of the accounts around the world that indicated the flood was a universal world event. Remember that? Which indicated that the same set of facts happened all over the earth. But remember, only Israel, the nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, were led and governed and protected by God, the one true God, Jehovah God. And we believe, if you're believing the Bible, we believe that we're getting the true story. Well, all around the world, they didn't necessarily get they got the same set of facts, but they didn't necessarily get the true story. Okay? So they know there's a flood, but they would give it a different name or they would give it a different purpose, from time to time. Well, guess what else happened? Do you think that when the Rephaim reappeared on the earth after the flood, do you think it only happened in Bible times? Do you think it only happened in the area of the Holy Land? Well, I'm fixing to surprise you. What you're looking at is a quote that from Abraham Lincoln when he was giving a speech that had to do with Niagara Falls, the Niagara Falls being a tourist attraction, that sort of thing. Read this quote. "The eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." President Abraham Lincoln believed there were giants that had one time lived in what's now the United States.
He speaks as if that's common knowledge. He didn't act like he was revealing anything to anybody.
Exactly. This was not a shot. Nobody ran up to him and said, Mr. President, what the heck do you mean extinct giant? In that day, yeah. Everybody knew it. I'm going to shock you with some more stuff. Today, I can tell you right now, the Smithsonian Institution does everything it can to never acknowledge that giants existed in other parts of the world. Today, the Smithsonian Institution will do all it can to discourage you from ever even asking about it. But in the Smithsonian's own records, here's what's found. This is the annual report of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution showing the operations, expenditures, and conditions of the institution for the years 1873 to 1877. Can y'all read these, or do I have to read them out loud to you?
Go ahead and read them. One skull measuring 36 inches in circumference that was found in Anna, Illinois, 1873. Then the next one is one full skeleton with double rows of teeth buried alongside a gigantic axe, referred to in the report as a gigantic savage, Amelia Island in Florida in 1875. Then the next line was giant axes and skinning stones. One weighed over 15 pounds, had an ornately carved handle, and was of such mass that it was documented only a giant could have wielded this. That's the Kishwaukee Mounds in Illinois. And then one jawbone that easily slipped around the entire face of a large man on the research team. That was also found at Kishwaukee Mounds in Illinois, 1877.
Now, folks, does that catch you by surprise?
Keep going.
Did you know that? Here's another report from the Smithsonian Institution.
The 5th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology to the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. This was 1883 to 1884. Smithsonian excavation teams discovered 10 more giant skeletons in mounds and burial sites in Wisconsin, Illinois, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia.
That's 1883 to 1884.
Then the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology to the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, 1894, 2 enormous skulls, several baffling femur bones, and 17 giant skeletons were unearthed in Illinois, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia.
Now, here's what you need to understand. I think that makes it clear. Number one, the evidence is there. Somehow, whatever the methodology was that Rephaim reappeared after the flood, it was worldwide, okay? But here's what you need to know. And this is part of what we face. And again, this is driven by the seed war. What's that great world famous book called? On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. That book was published in November of 1859. It was quickly embraced by every proponent of the secular scientific world. In the early 1900s, new secular leadership took over at the Smithsonian Institution. The evidence of the existence of giants began to disappear. Folks, we could spend hours on the evidence of giants being real. Okay, now let me tell you this. There's a lot of hoaxes out there. Yeah. There's a lot of fake photographs out there, but they're not all hoaxes and they're not all fake. We read you 3 pages of official documents with the Smithsonian Institution simply because they couldn't purge them all. But if you went to Washington, D.C. and said, hey, I want to see the bones of all those giants that y'all found, they go, what bones? What giants? But they can't refute those reports because the reports have been long ago made public. So you can't take back what's already in the public domain. But the actual bones themselves, the actual skeletons themselves, you'll never see them. You'll never see them till God shows them to us. Okay? Next slide. All right. Like I said, we could spend several lessons on the fact that giants were real. There are some people who will tell you that there's evidence that they're in certain pockets on the earth, remote areas, they're still real. I'm not going there. Not going to get there.
We don't know.
We don't know. But historically, the historical evidence is definitely there. I mean, Smithsonian Institution's own records, talk about it?
I don't know if we made this point very well, but a lot of the mounds that were originally thought to be Indian burial mounds, those do not contain deceased Native Americans. The people themselves will tell you that was there when they got to the area.
Yeah.
And they've been excavated and what's the word? It's been obfuscated.
Yeah.
It's been hidden. That's a whole nother rabbit trail, but
Yeah.
go down the divine.
All right. The other thing we wanted to cover, we can cover this real quickly, is the fact that the divine counsel, we touched on it, we exposed you to it. This divine counsel is not made up of men. It's not made up as some people would, or at least the conventional wisdom had turned out to be. Human judges that God was condemning in Psalms 82. And I'm going to read it out to you. Psalms 82, God stands in the congregation of the mighty. The actual word there is Elohim. He judges among the gods, Elohim plural. And the he is capitalized, so that tells you we're talking about Jehovah God. How long will you judge? And this is basically God, getting on to him. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. The Hebrew word meant moved. I said, you are gods. Again, Elohim, the plural of Elohim. You are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. You are B'nai of the Most High, meaning I created you. I gave you these people to help them. But what did you do? You judged them. You judged them unjustly, and you preferred the wicked over the innocent. So here's what God said when he condemned them. He judged them and condemned them. He said, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. And this is where the psalmist comes back and says, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations. All right, that's going to tie back to the covenant God made with Abraham. And it's going to tie back to when we study the book of Acts, that phrase is going to have a lot of meaning to you. That last sentence, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations. You need to underline that. That's in Psalm 82. Underline that, make a note about it, because you're going to see it again, and you're going to see where it's put into play in the book of Acts. Okay? Psalms 89. Here's another reason why we're talking about heavenly beings, not men. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings? It's interpreted as heavenly beings, but again, it's using B'nai Elohim. Is like the Lord, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you. That's Psalms 89, 5 through 8. Folks, we're fixing, before she clicks the page, we're fixing to make it as plain as the nose on your face. The divine counsel has been real. I can't tell you what constitutes it now, because like I said, in Psalms 82, he's basically mad at him because he didn't do what he trusted him to do. How did he judge them? He says they're eventually going to die. Is that the source of the second rebelling of the angels? I don't know. But the fact that the divine counsel existed is not in question anymore. Now click the next one. All right, here we go. Here's what I want you to do. Forget you're a Christian. Forget you've ever read any Sunday school book, you've ever heard any. I want you to clear your mind. Act like you know nothing. And I want you to read 1 Kings 22, 19 through 23. And here, I'm going to do it for you. First Kings 22, 19 through 23. Be sure to make a note of that, because this is going to be so plain as the nose on your face. Here's what it says. Micaiah continued, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. Where's God's throne? It's not on earth, it's in heaven. With all the multitudes of heaven standing around him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? Now, let me give you some background here. Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab was one of the worst rulers of the nation of Israel after King David and King Solomon. Okay. He married Jezebel, who worshiped Baal. As soon as he married Jezebel, he made the nation of Israel start worshiping Baal and left Jehovah God. And it's just been a story on top of story of how bad Ahab had sinned as the king of Israel, okay? So God determined that it's time for Ahab to
meet his demise.
So that's the background of what I started reading. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? One suggested this, and another that. Finally, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, I will entice him. And the Lord said, by what means? The spirit said, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all his prophets. And God said, you will succeed in enticing him, said the Lord. Go and do it. So now the Lord has put a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you.
So basically,
God judged Ahab to die. He called on the members of the divine council for input. Now, picture that. Y'all remember the TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, and Horshack, at the back of the room with his hand raised. Oh, call on me. I got the answer.
Some of these people are too young.
Yeah, some of them too young. All right. Anyway, you see the picture. Well, this one spirit speaks up and says, hey, I got what I think is a pretty good idea. God said, I like your idea. I'm sure it's going to work. I want you to put it into place. God confirmed in advance that it would succeed. That's 1 Kings 22, 19 through 23.
Oops. What just happened? So sorry.
You went wrong way.
I did.
All right, one more. All right. How many of you remember the story of King Nebuchadnezzar?
Nobody.
All right, the story of King Nebuchadnezzar is that he was going to lose his mind. He was going to have a mental disease for 7 years, and the disease was going to be manifested in that he would act like he was a cow, a beast in the field who ate grass. That was what God had issued a judgment, and he allowed the divine council to carry out the sentence. And here we put it in for you. This is Daniel 4, verse 13 through 18. I saw in the visions of my head, this is King Nebuchadnezzar telling Daniel, who at the time was called Belteshazzar, what his vision was. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher. It's an Aramaic word. A lot of what Daniel is written in is in the language of Aramaic, simply because he was not in the land of Israel. They had been carried as captives off to Babylon, and that's where Daniel was. This is the language that Daniel was writing in at the time. A holy one, a messenger, basically an angel, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This is still King Nebuchadnezzar now telling Daniel what his vision was. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers. It's the Aramaic word, but it's plural this time, and it means the holy ones. The decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to him, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar was the Aramaic name for Daniel, tell me the interpretation, because all of the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Now go back and see what he said. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers. God made the ruling.
He was found guilty by God
Of pride, arrogance, self-importance.
But it's kind of like when you go to court and you're found guilty, and then you come back the next week for sentencing. And so, in my mind,
yeah.
And then he allowed the divine council to carry out or to issue the sentence.
Now, folks, this is in your Bible. These are not made up words. This is in your Bible. So understand, we're not talking about a pantheon,
No.
because there's only one Jehovah. He's the creator of everything, including all these lesser spiritual beings. So we're not talking about a pantheon. We're still talking about a monotheistic situation. There is only one Jehovah, one true God, and none there are who are like God, big G. But these other spiritual beings, God did allow them to be part of the lives of people on the earth who were not the nation of Israel. And it was a sin to the nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, to leave Jehovah and go after these other gods. It's not that these gods weren't real. Why do you think God would issue the edict of don't go worship ancestors, don't go worship the dead, don't do seances, don't do what do you call it, the Ouija boards and all that? It's because it was dangerous to his people. He wanted nothing that would distract them from him. But the fact that they existed is all through the Bible.
The 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments.
Why would God make a ruling of something that didn't exist? Why did he make a ruling against something that he had nothing to worry about anyway? There's no effect. They weren't real. It's not that they weren't real. They weren't real, supposed to be real to the nation that he chose. Go back to Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, and pay attention to verse 9. God reserved Jacob and his descendants for himself. That was his preferred nation. All right, click. Next week, we're going to kick it off. God's portion. Abraham is called. And folks, now that you got this background, you're going to see how so much of this foundational stuff is going to play out.